circle.
Yes.
Or as lawyers prefer to call it, the international law and the municipal law,
yeah.
which is the law applicable within.
We must start thinking of municipalities in Uganda.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the international level, of course, at the international level, we're talking about the laws that are formulated by states, when they meet. So states have the ability to make laws as between themselves. Previously, we have had, the subjects of international law, we used to be only states, but now it has since transformed. Even an individual today can be subject of international law.
Yes.
So looking at the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties, for example, it mandates every state to make some of these treaties. It also names which persons can conclude treaties within it. Now, so when states have an issue, including on human rights and other issues, they always meet together, maybe at a multilateral level, or even, as two states. So we have had several laws which have been concluded internationally with respect to the different freedoms. And that includes, first and foremost, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights.
Yes.
And of course, that's a favorite instrument to be mentioned because it is a very key document when it comes to talking about rights of the people and things like that. But of course, there are others. If you talk about the Magna Carta and the like, which was concluded in the UK, applicable within. So if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there are different articles that talk about the different civil liberties that we have. For example, Article 18,
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and the Law, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and the Law, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television.
We broke off at the point when you're talking about, the justification for restricting civil liberties, because in your view, perhaps that's what everybody could say, that, the situation demanded or permitted government to deviate a little bit because of the extraordinary times we found ourselves in. But I want to get guidance from you. Are there any guidelines that enable states, that guide states as they try to limit the enjoyment of, civil liberties? What does what guidance exists so that, because I think the danger everybody has been saying is that, people are using COVID-19 as an advantage to be arbitrary, to become, promote dictatorial tendencies. So I'm curious to know, are there any parameters in place that guide any forms of derogation from civil liberties?
Well, thank you. So if you look at the international level, at least there are some guidelines which have been put in place in order that governments ought to follow.
Yes.
Ought to follow if they are to limit people's rights in any way or under any circumstances. And among others, the first that government needs to take into account is that the restrictions must follow the law.
Hello, welcome to yet another episode of You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. My name is Jonathan Ochom, your host. You and the Law is your ultimate program on all matters legal. Is it about land? Is it about health? Is it about property? Is it about criminal law? Anything that concerns the law, it's going to be discussed right here. In this particular edition, we're talking about the impacts of COVID-19 on human rights. And we have so many rights that we've been looking over the last few weeks. And today we're focusing on civil liberties. How has COVID-19 affected our enjoyment of civil liberties? What steps did the government put in place to protect our civil liberties? What are the challenges? What can be done to improve the enjoyment of civil liberties in the country amidst such a difficult time like we find ourselves in? With me in studio is our regular guest, Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub, Uganda. Emma, you're welcome to You and the Law.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
How have you been?
Once again. Been great.
Yeah. I know you've appeared here before and talked about, Legal Hub and the kind of things that you do and how COVID-19 has affected your work. But I thought just for those who could be watching for the first time today, we could just get a quick snapshot, 5 to 3 lines about, Legal Hub Uganda and the things that you do.
Well, thank you. Legal Hub Uganda is an organization that was started by 2 brilliant lawyers and started in 2017, went on to register as a non-governmental organization. But also importantly, Legal Hub Uganda intends to take the law to the last mile, to the last person in this country. So this is not just a focus on an urban person, but a person who is in a rural area, in the village. And so we're using different mechanisms to ensure that we reach the last mile in this country. And so we have different innovative ways that we have tried to utilize in order to achieve that objective. And that includes radio, podcasting, now we're on TV, and we keep growing. As time goes by, we'll keep finding other innovative ways to reach the last mile in this country.
Amazing stuff.
Yes.
And talking about generally COVID-19, how has it affected your work as an organization?
Well, COVID-19 has affected us in ways that were not imagined, many years ago. Because now you saw the government locking up the country. And with locking up the country, that meant that most of our activities, physical activities, could not happen because we have different programs. Because we do both online and offline activities. So the offline activities had to be put on hold. And to date, we have not yet fully recovered those offline activities. But nonetheless, it enabled us to emphasize more our usage of our online presence through our social media pages on Facebook, Twitter, and now the TV program, and that has enabled us to keep going. Great. In the meantime, as we are waiting for the country to open up
fully. Yeah. So Emma, today we are focusing on civil liberties and how COVID-19 has impacted their enjoyment. And I thought we could start by understanding what civil liberties are. If you're to unpack this for an ordinary person, what would you tell them amounts to or equals to civil liberties?
Well, thank you. So when we talk about civil liberties, we're talking about the foundational rights that individuals have in order to enjoy their rights fully as human beings in this world. Because like we've stated in shows before on this very program, rights are inherent. They are not granted by the state. So as and when you're born, or whenever you're born with certain what? Rights. In fact, there's always that argument as to what point you begin enjoying rights. You know, and of course that's controversial. Is it in your mother's womb? You know, when you're conceived, do you start enjoying certain rights? Or it should be after birth? Because, you know, that sucks in the debate of abortion rights and things like that, which of course in this country is not yet fully embraced. But of course it happens. So these are foundational rights to do with conscience. You know, you need to have the right that you have to hold opinion, to conceive ideas, to express yourself in whichever ways that you may, you know, that you may want.
Yes.
You know, and that includes petitioning the government as and when you feel that certain things are not going on well, maybe for you personally, maybe for your community. You know, I remember so many years ago, there was a time Jose Chameleone was dissatisfied with the certain issues that happened in Tanzania. And you know, he picked a mattress and went and he started at the embassy of Tanzania.
Yes.
And of course he was apprehended at the time. So basically these are foundational rights that we have, as I've just listed.
And so what are the examples of civil liberties? Because it seems to be a broader term. Like what would you flag off as some of the rights that fall under this whole bracket of civil liberties?
Yes, thank you. So we're talking about freedom of expression, for example. Now, before you even express yourself, you need to have the freedom to conceive ideas.
Yes.
Your conscience must not be restricted, because there are places where, in some parts of the world, where you're not free to think, even mere thinking. You know, if the government in place discovers that you're having ideas that they feel are detrimental to their own objectives, then they could have you apprehended.
Yes.
Places like North Korea, you know, and even some places in Africa until recently.
Yes.
You remember Libya.
Yeah.
You know, there was this whole idea that Paul had about restrictions that were happening. So you need to have a free conscience. You need to have freedom to express yourself. You need to have freedom of assembly.
Yes.
A freedom to petition government for whatever, you know, dissatisfaction that you may have with the government of the day. Yes.
And with that idea, then we need to have a quick run into the law, which law provides for the various civil liberties you've listed. You've talked about expression, you've talked about worship, you've talked about petitioning the government, and those sort of examples. I thought that we could then delve into the legalese around this, right? But perhaps that can be more appropriate after the short break. Viewers, you're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. Today we're discussing civil liberties and how they've been affected by the COVID-19 pandemic. Let's go for a short break. We'll be right back.
When it comes to the law, we basically live the law, you know, on a day-to-day basis, you know. Whether it is in your bedroom, there is a law that governs it. If you're married, for example, even if you're single, there could be something touching on the law, because you might be in your bedroom with an underage girl, or you might be with another person's wife, you know. All the things are the law, you know.
If you're a human being, you have rights. Those rights are called human rights. They are examples: the right to health, the right to freedom from torture, that underscores human dignity, freedom from slavery. You're not supposed to be someone's slave.
If you look at our penal code, it sets out another marriage laws. It sets out the persons who can marry and those who cannot marry, right? For example, you can't marry your close relatives. You know, if you did, you'd be committing a crime.
The state is not supposed to tell you who to worship, how to worship, how many times in a day. No, you have a right to work. A right to work. You have freedom of association.
Cohabitation for whatever period of time does not make you husband and wife, right? And that is why we emphasize to people that when the relationship is still hot, you know, you must ensure that you do what? Marry.
Yes.
You know?
For human rights to be respected, protected, and fulfilled, relevant government programs must actually work. Medicine should reach hospitals, oxygen should be there, health workers should have gloves, teachers should be present. Now they are mostly absent, and they have left the profession, a good number of them. They are into trading. So things must work. If things don't work, human rights are not respected, are not protected, and are not fulfilled.
COVID-19 has tested our hope and faith as individuals, families, and the country at large. Besides destroying many aspects of our lives, the novel coronavirus has also affected our human rights in many ways. You and Elau, the COVID edition, is a 30-minute weekly television program that focuses on the impact of COVID-19 on human rights in Uganda. The program engages experts to explain the importance of rights-based approaches to the success of any public health response to ensure the respect, protection, and fulfillment of human rights amidst the challenges presented by COVID-19. You and Elau, the television program, brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda, taking the law to the last mile in proud association with I4C Africa Hub and House of Talent Television, coming soon.
Welcome back. This is You and Elau, the COVID edition on House of Talent Television. My name is Jonathan Uchom, your host, and today we're discussing the impacts of COVID-19 on our civil liberties here in Uganda. And with me in studio is our regular Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda. Emma, you're welcome back from the break.
Thank you.
So before we went for a break, we started the conversation around the legal framework that provides for the various civil liberties that you've highlighted. Yes. From the start. So I thought we could run through the law and to enable us, establish the foundation of these rights.
Yes. Thank you. Like we have stated severally, you realize that when talking about the law, we have the different segments of the law. And that is the international and then the local.
Yes.
Or as lawyers prefer to call it, the international law and the municipal law, which is the law applicable within.
We must start thinking of municipalities in Uganda.
Exactly. Yeah. So if you look at the international level, of course, at the international level, we're talking about the laws that are formulated by states, when they meet. So states have the ability to make laws as between themselves. Previously, we have had, the subjects of international law, we used to be only states, but now it has since transformed. Even an individual today can be subject of international law. Yes. So looking at the Vienna Convention on the law of treaties, for example, it mandates every state to make some of these treaties. It also names which persons can conclude treaties within it. Now, so when states have an issue, including on human rights and other issues, they always meet together, maybe at a multilateral level, or even, as two states. So we have had several laws which have been concluded internationally with respect to the different freedoms. And that includes, first and foremost, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And of course, that's a favorite instrument to be mentioned because it is a very key document when it comes to talking about rights of the people and things like that. But of course there are others. If you talk about the Magna Carta and the like, which was concluded in the UK, applicable within. So if you look at the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there are different articles that talk about the different civil liberties that we have. For example, Article 18, that provides for conscience, freedom of expression and the like. So you basically have to look at Article 18, 19, up to 20. It highlights those rights. So you have the right to hold an opinion, to conceive ideas. And holding ideas or conceiving them is very, very important because it enables any society to develop. There's a connection between the two. Because if you go to places like the US, they'll tell you about the Silicon Valley. And people have all this free will to think. They have the right to create. And the bedrock of having the ability to create is embedded in some of these rights that we have already highlighted. And that's why you see people like Mark Zuckerberg are able to innovate and come up with Facebook, where everyone is able to, share their ideas,
interconnect,
and things like that. And now you've heard of Elon Musk, who is now richer than Bill Gates and I think Warren Buffett combined. All this come as a result of people having the will to think and to create. So if we're able to have these rights, it has a connection with other rights that people...
And the economy.
Yes, and the economy. So the ability to think is very, very important.
Okay.
Now, once you're able to think, then you should be able to express yourself, in the same vein. Now, freedom to express yourself is very key. Many states across the world, in fact, drawing from the UDHR, have provided for this right already in their different regional instruments, in their national constitutions. But of course, always the issue is that the challenge is about enforcement of the same. Because the law might be saying that you have the right to this, but enforcement becomes another issue altogether.
Yes.
We're talking about the freedom to religion. You have the ability to choose your religion as and when you want, and also to live religion if you want to. So you should not be bound by by all these things of belonging to a certain religious inclination if you do not want to. So if you look at different parts of the world, including Uganda, this right is really very much emphasized. Though we see that in some places maybe this is under threat. In some places they have state religions. But in Uganda specifically, for example, we do not have a state religion.
A secular state.
Uganda is a secular state. But the whole point is that these rights are guaranteed under the UDHR. Another very important right is the freedom of assembly.
Yes.
The freedom of assembly. So if you want to assemble with others and to probably criticize or give a petition to the government of the day on any issue that's affecting you, then you also have a right which is guaranteed as per the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. Of course, some people might argue that, what's the UDHR? How does it apply to us? Well, it may have been concluded before we got even independence.
Yes.
But some of these laws have gained customary application internationally. So today you cannot come up and go against some of these rights because they are already provided for and they have gained customary application. And so if you go against them, then you'll be violating international laws.
Okay.
The other very important instrument is the ICCPR, which is the Covenant on Civil Political Rights. So this also provides for the same rights as I've already stated under the UDHR. So I need not emphasize because they're similar in their provision of those same rights. Only that the ICPR came long after the UDHR. If we come to our regional level, that is the African continent, we also have instruments that speak to the same rights. So we have what we call the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. That charter sometimes is called the Banjul Charter because it was concluded in Banjul.
That's in the Gambia.
Yes, in the Gambia.
Yeah.
So looking at that instrument, it also provides for those similar rights in the different parts of that charter. Freedom of assembly, religion, expression, conscience, which speaks to the same issues that I have already explained under the UDHR. When we come closer home, at the regional level here in the East African community, we have the treaty which is establishing the East African community. Now, if you look at that treaty, under Article 7, 8, 9, it provides for the operational principles that are applicable and the fundamental principles. And among others, it recognizes democracy, rule of law, human rights, and the like. And specifically, that treaty recognizes the Banjul Charter, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights. So you can see that the East African community recognizes these rights, but instead of coming up with their own Bill of Rights, an instrument to cater for human rights within the community, they have just decided to adopt the Banjul Charter into the East African community.
Oh, just wholesome.
Exactly.
Oh, okay.
But of course, this has also created debate. Some people are saying that maybe the East African community should come up with their own Bill of Rights. Others are saying it would be a wastage of resources and the like because we have this document. And since our ultimate objective is to integrate Africa as a whole. Why should we have now regional instruments providing for the same?
Okay.
So those are two competing views, but it appears those who are for the Banjul Charter being the main document are taking
carrying the day.
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So that means that what that means is that the governments within the East African community, the East African community is basically composed of Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Rwanda, Burundi, South Sudan. Though DRC and also Somalia have expressed interest to join.
Are they still in the east of Africa?
Yeah, so it's expanding because the treaty says whichever country shares a border with one of the partner states can join.
Oh, okay.
That's why you see the DRC, which is on the other side now, intending to join because it shares a border with the Uganda, Rwanda, and others. Yeah, so that means that the governments within the community are enjoined to respect these rights, among others. So, but if you come closer home, in Uganda,
yes.
Now this is what we're talking about, the municipal law.
Yes.
The law which is applicable within our country.
Yes.
We have the Constitution of Uganda of 1995. Now, if you look at that Constitution specifically, it first of all it says it is the supreme law.
Yes.
It says power belongs to the people. It is the supreme law. Any other law which is inconsistent is null and void.
Yes.
And so, Uganda being a signatory to different international instruments is therefore enjoined to recognize some of those rights at the local level. So, if you went to to Chapter 4 of the Constitution of Uganda, it specifically provides for the fundamental rights that people have, the civil rights, among others. So, it emphasizes aspects to do with equality, as a starting point. All of us are equal under the law. We have the freedom of expression under Article 29, freedom to hold opinions. We have the freedom of to exercise our religion. We have a right to fair hearing. And like I said earlier, Uganda is a secular state. We do not have a state religion, for example. So that means that everybody, has a right to practice some form of religion.
Yes.
Of course, we have the non-formal religions, either you belong to Islam or you belong to whatever denomination in Christianity. But we also do have people who practice what? Traditional religions.
Yes.
They do exist.
Yeah.
Except that, of course, sometimes there's mob justice from people who subscribe the main religious organizations, either Christianity or Islam, who don't want to give space to traditionalists, and yet they also have guaranteed rights, to practice whatever religion it is that they may choose to call it. So the Constitution guarantees these rights, and so we have a right to enjoy them. But whereas the Constitution provides for them, some of these rights are not absolute.
Yes.
Some of them are limited. If you look at Article 44 of the Constitution, they can be limited by the state. But the parameters under which the state can do this, it can't just wake up and deny you your rights.
Yes.
So there are only about 4 rights which cannot be derogated from, but the rest of these rights could easily be, depending.
So most of the civil liberties can be withdrawn.
They could be withdrawn under certain circumstances. So if you see government doing ABCD, then what you have to question is whether the government is doing it in a right manner, in a proper manner, with good intentions, and that the people know the limitations expressly, as opposed to where government just wakes up and does things like the way it wants.
Emma, you've given a very comprehensive legal background to this discussion. Then can we have a conversation around the obligations? Who has the duty to ensure that these rights are protected?
Well, thank you. Now, of course, government bears a very good responsibility in terms of ensuring that these rights are protected. But it doesn't stop with the government alone. It also extends to us as individuals to ensure that your neighbors, rights are respected. So because of the machinery that the government has, the state, it's able to protect or to ensure compliance, with some of the set rules in place.
What do you mean by machinery? People might think of actual.
Well, what we're talking in terms of the apparatus that the government has, in terms of the security personnel, for example, because it is the biggest employer of the security.
Some people say instruments of coercion.
Exactly. So the government has those instruments. So government has the security, it has the guns, The money, so it has a duty, to ensure that there's compliance. But how about in certain instances where you find yourself in a group of with a group of other people, and one of the persons in the group is their rights are probably being abused. Don't you have an obligation as an individual to that extent, at least to inform them that this person has a right to ABCD, as guaranteed by the Constitution? But the government bears a great responsibility.
Okay, yeah, that's sort of a good foundation then for us to switch to the discussion around COVID-19. Like we've discussed in the show before, the advent of the global pandemic switched the world into a different mode and changed how we do things. And but along the way, of course, some of the actions that were taken had significant implications on civil liberties. So
yes,
I want us to have a discussion on how has COVID-19 actually affected the enjoyment of civil liberties in Uganda.
Well, thank you. Like I've said also before, the advent of the coming of COVID into the world threw several governments into panic across the world. And we're not spared as well. At least for us, we had the benefit of seeing that COVID is coming, but maybe we chose to ignore in some ways. So government had to react in certain ways. And you saw the president addressing the media and the people of Uganda on several occasions about COVID. And so certain rights were suspended for time being. And I think the situation has not yet changed. It may have changed, but with some limitations. For example, the freedom of of worship, religion, it was restricted to a certain extent, especially from last year. And I think up to now, we can only have about 200 people in a religious function at any given time. But of course, if you move out there, people are maybe abusing this. But at least the government restricted that freedom. They said you cannot congregate, because if you do, then COVID is likely to spread, to the different people, people who may be in attendance. So freedom of worship was affected. So there was a shift from the physical attendance of worship to to online worship. But luckily, the Bible says that where 2 or 3 gather, the Holy Spirit is available. And I want to believe that the scripture is right. So I think people have had to change the way they view, or to actually practice what the Bible says in certain respects. Freedom of assembly was also affected in some ways, because now the desire to watch the number of people that gather in a given place overrode that particular freedom. And you know that we had elections, for example, in the course of last year and early this year. And so government had to come up with the restrictions. I think the restriction was that there could only be 200 people
in a rally.
But of course, you saw how hard it was for government to enforce such. And so the result was a lot of tear gas during the election cycle that just passed. People's ability also to express themselves in some ways was also limited. Because COVID has brought issues to do with immunization to the fore. So how do you balance? Because some people are saying that you must get immunized for you to survive the scourge. Others are saying it should also be within my right to choose whether to get immunized or not. So those are competing views that are currently happening in the world. But because most governments in the world are very much interested to toe the official line from the World Health Organization to do with immunization. So there's a lot of kind of limited space for those that have views that are opposed to that. So that's why you see, if you go to platforms, even international like YouTube, they do not permit views that go contrary to immunization.
Even Facebook, if you see anything with COVID, there's a disclaimer, a warning that comes.
Exactly. So I mean, maybe it raises issues to do with freedom of expression, but which has been exposed by this COVID. And Uganda has not been as well spared. It's because we have different laws in place that cater to this, including the Immunization Act and other laws. So those are some of the ways that certain rights were affected during this period of COVID.
And Emma, if we are to examine those interventions that were put in place, of course they're justifiable.
Yes.
You and I agree on that.
Yes.
But I'm wondering, are there those that worked or that enabled people preserve their civil liberties amidst that tough time that we find ourselves in?
Well, looking at the general objectives of these restrictions, because if you're looking at restricting rights, then you have to be precise. Government must be precise with the kind of laws or regulations that they put in place in order for it to pass the international test.
Yes.
Now, if government, of course, again, there's this whole thing of the president's directives and all that, and as to whether they amount to law. You know, so we saw several directives coming from the president through his speeches. But of course, those speeches were sanitized by the Minister of Health because she was mandated to. The office holder was female,
yes,
and is female now.
Yeah.
So she sanitized most of the president's speeches through reducing them into regulations.
Yes.
So I believe the general objective, you know, for some of these restrictions was for public good.
Yes.
And I believe that some of these regulations in place achieved a certain, you know, public good of preserving, of protecting people from getting
Curbing the spread.
Yes. Yeah, so amidst that, of course, people were able to enjoy some of those rights still because most of the radio stations were operating and so people were able to express themselves.
Journalists were actually essential workers.
Journalists were essential workers up to now. In
Yeah.
fact, ahead of lawyers. You know? So that shows you how important information is.
Yeah.
You know, so several TV stations were working. At least many were not affected in any way.
That's a positive note, and I think it's about time we go for a short break. You're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. Today we're discussing the impacts of COVID-19 on our civil liberties in Uganda, and we're examining the government measures and how they affected our civil liberties. Let's go for a short break. We'll be right back. Welcome back from the short break. You're watching You and the Law, the COVID edition here on House of Talent Television. Proudly brought to you by Legal Hub Uganda in partnership with I4C Africa Hub. And today with me in studio is Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda, where we're discussing the impacts of COVID-19 on our civil liberties in the country. Emma, welcome back from the break.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So we broke off at the point when you're talking about, you know, the justification for restricting civil liberties, because in your view, perhaps that's what everybody could say, that, yeah, the situation demanded or permitted government to deviate a little bit because of the extraordinary times we found ourselves in. But I want to get guidance from you. Are there any guidelines that enable states, that guide states as they try to limit the enjoyment of, you know, civil liberties? What does the what guidance exists so that, because I think the danger everybody has been saying is that, you know, people are using COVID-19 as an advantage to be arbitrary, to become, you know, promote dictatorial tendencies. So I'm curious to know, are there any parameters in place that guide any forms of derogation from civil liberties?
Well, thank you. So if you look at the international level, at least there are some guidelines which have been put in place in order that governments ought to follow.
Yes.
Ought to follow if they are to limit people's rights in any way or under any circumstances. And among others, the first that government needs to take into account is that the restrictions must follow the law. you know, or they must be lawful.
Yes.
So that means that, and that's why the issue of the presidential directives comes in, as whether they are lawful or they form part of the law just by him speaking at whatever event.
Yes.
And different scholars may have different views about that. But the bottom line is that the president's speeches do not form law in any way, because we have established ways under which the law could be made.
Yes.
So in our case, since the law specifically mandated the Minister of Health, the Minister of Health had a mandate to make whatever regulations to restrict people's rights. And so that had to come within the law.
Okay.
Number two, these limitations must be time bound. In other words, that if you're restricting people's rights because of a given scenario, say a pandemic, or there's some kind of social unrest in a given country, or there's a state of emergency, these limitations must be time bound. I mean, like, they should have timelines within which they should be applicable. They should not be ceaselessly binding. Because we've seen several countries, there were several reports that many countries were trying to come up with regulations that had far-reaching consequences beyond the COVID period. And it's not just in Africa. Even if you went to Europe, Hungary, for example, was cited as among those that were coming up with authoritarian laws under the pretext of COVID-19. So the laws were looking beyond COVID. So if you're using, why should you use COVID? You know, so but internationally, they say that they should be time bound.
So time bound. So that means you have a window to sort of review after, say, this is for 1 month or 2 weeks.
Exactly. And so that should be based on the advice of the people who are within that, who are knowledgeable about a given issue. And in this case of the pandemic, those are the health professionals. They should be able to tell us whether the COVID has reduced or it is increasing, to inform decision making, to extend some of these timelines. And that's why you see whenever the president is addressing the nation, he keeps referring to the advice of the medical doctors, the scientists.
Yes.
Because that shows you that he is following certain directives or certain advice. So the final decisions lies with him and his cabinet, because they're in charge of running this country.
Okay.
The other issue is about pursuing a legitimate purpose.
Yes.
Before you impose these limitations and all that, you have to ensure that you're pursuing a legitimate purpose. And so prevention of COVID would appear to very many as a legitimate thing to be controlled.
Yes.
Because if you let it be out there, then it means that many people were going to die. And that's why you saw when the pandemic was coming in sometime last year, you saw the World Health Organization saying, and others saying, that there are going to be streets, there are going to be bodies on the streets of Africa.
African countries, yes.
So governments had to react in a panicky mode or whatever mode, but they had to pursue a certain purpose to prevent many of their citizens from dying. And that's why now the laws seem to be, or regulations seem to be moving towards almost forcing people to go for COVID vaccines. Though of course there's a bit of resistance here and there, which government is trying to do through sensitization of the masses and all that. But at least the legitimate purpose was being, government was trying to follow a legitimate purpose.
So Emma, looking at those three conditions you've eloquently explained, what is the assessment of Uganda's performance then, using those three parameters: legality, time boundness, and legitimate aim? What would you be assessment of the steps the government of Uganda took to curb the spread of the virus?
Well, I think we did well at first, because to everyone things were quite clear that we needed to avoid many people dying, and in fact people were scared.
Yes.
There was a time when they declared the second lockdown. Actually, people were compliant. There's a time people took it upon themselves, for example, to wear masks.
Yes.
So there was a huge level of discipline and cooperation with government. But because people have different interests, the people have economic issues to deal with on a daily, because they must put food on the table. So many people, I think, get mixed up, because they want to live, but they also want to live on their feet.
Yes.
They want to put food on the table.
Yeah.
Because you can't afford to have a crying child in your house because you're following probably the SOPs
Who
and all.
doesn't even understand COVID.
For them, they want to eat food.
Yes.
So I think we did well, but I think over time, I think we have forgotten to review the timelines. For example, if we talk about the night curfew, is it still having any relevance? Because it's affecting people's other rights, movement, assembly, and all these things. So is it still achieving a legitimate purpose? Because people have argued in different parts, in Kenya and other places, they're saying, what does COVID-19 have to do with the people staying in their houses in the night? And yet at daytime, they're in Chikubo,
Yes.
in their thousands. So I think government needs to strike a balance. I think there needs to be review because this curfew, some of them have stayed for a very long time. In Kenya now, they're saying that they don't see the relevance of the night curfew, for example. They're saying let the economy be opened. And I think it's a compelling argument because so many economies around the world have suffered as a result of the COVID restrictions. Countries have lost taxes and things like that. So I think Uganda tried, but I think more review needs to be done with a view to opening up the economy. Yeah.
Someone could argue that perhaps a lot of transmission happens in the night because the economic activities perhaps done at night, you know, people could be in a bar, in a party mode, and a lot of mingling that could justify us being asked to go home early. But you know, that's just perhaps a view. Emma, we need to then think about what we learn, because I don't think that if COVID-19 ended and there's nothing we learn as a country, I think that would be a bit of a problem. What do we learn from the COVID response? What lessons can we pick that perhaps can be used to respond to a similar situation if it happened in future?
Yeah, like I have stated previously before, we need to think about planning, better planning. Planning is always key because we have failed in most instances. Most of our reactions to very many things have always been chaotic. So the government needs to plan better.
Yes.
We need to embrace technology like government has been speaking of late since last year during the COVID. Plan, I mean technology. But if we're talking about technology, for example, campaigns were taken to radio and other media mechanisms. But even then, government followed people towards radio stations. You heard that some presidential candidates had appeared on radio stations to campaign, and for some reason a radio station could be switched off. You know, so if we're saying that we're embracing technology and all the things, then allow people to express themselves within that. Last year, I think a year before, we saw government came up with a tax, social media tax of sorts.
Yes.
The OTT. Now they have removed it because of the poor reaction from the people.
Yes.
They removed it and now they have imposed a tax on buying data. So if we're talking technology, then you should be making data affordable to the people. For now, by imposing a tax, I think it's like 12% or something like that, it's unaffordable to many people. So it becomes a luxury that is enjoyed by a few people. So we need to think of better ways. Also, we need to think of funding innovations that enabled people to enjoy similar rights. Our country, I think, lags behind. You cannot easily find many companies, entities, or even the government that is willing to put in money into innovations. The innovations are left behind, and we're talking about technology now. So most of the money which is coming into innovations to enable us enjoy some of these rights is coming from outside the country. So, but if government is taking a leading role in fighting for technology to be embraced, then we should have homegrown solutions, even including funding to some of these innovations.
You highlight sort of a bit of the lessons that we pick from the COVID response, and I think that's important because even when COVID started, they kept saying that, you know, we've handled cholera before, Ebola, and there are a lot of things that we can borrow from that experience and translate it into COVID. But as we come to the end of this show, I keep asking guests here that if you find yourself sitting in a government position as a Minister of Justice or a Minister of Gender or Minister of Health, you know, you don't have to be a doctor to be there. What are those 1, 2, 3 things that you would be at the forefront of your agenda to ensure that we protect civil liberties when we are in difficult times like this? Just like you're wrapping short as we come to the end of the show.
Yeah, I think if I was in that position, it is very important to objectively exercise the power that has been granted to a particular position, whether as Attorney General or a given Minister of Health, if the issue at hand is a health related issue. Whatever rules you make or choose to make, they should be within the law. There shouldn't be ulterior motives or other motivations for you to come up with these laws. Because in some parts of the world, some governments were seeking to curtail the work of the opposition through taking advantage of pandemics such as this.
Even civil society.
So we need to be very careful about that, and so I would have to exercise the powers granted to a particular office with caution, and should be evidence-based. If it is health-related issues, it should be based on the evidence of the scientists, like the president often talks about.
Yeah. Viewers, this is You and the Law, the COVID edition. Today we've been hosting Mr. Emmanuel Elau from Legal Hub Uganda, and he's made a powerful conclusion. They need to be informed by data, they need to be informed by science as we design interventions around dealing with pandemics. More importantly, he has stated that our interventions need to be grounded on law. We need to exercise power as a government in a judicious manner, in a way that upholds the law, but more importantly, respects the rights of people. With that, we've come to the end of today's episode of You and the Law, the COVID edition, here on House of Talent Television. I've been your host, Jonathan Ochom, and this show was brought to you with proud partnership with Legal Hub Uganda in partnership with I4C Africa Hub. Until next time, it's a bye from us.